All right, so before we get focused on any painting, let's talk a little bit about the composition and the subject that we're starting off with. So this is, believe it or not, a little dollhouse chair, and that's how I usually start working in my studies. I find a piece that inspires me and I want to practice it over and over again. So this will be a really good lesson in perception, perspective, proportion, shadow, shade, value, all of those things. But we need to talk about the placement of it and what makes a good composition. So if you're familiar with the rule of thirds, that means that if you place a grid over your photo or your image, you don't want it smack dab in the center. And as you can see, this right now as it is in the center. It lacks a little bit of life, it doesn't have any interest. So I want you to just look at it moved around the piece. Now everybody's going to have their own feeling about where the chair should be, but just look at how it opens up a little bit more of the story. It all of a sudden isn't about the chair, it's about everything else around it and the chair and its relation to the canvas. All right, so after playing around with the placement of the chair, I really like the composition where the chair is in the bottom left-hand corner of the piece. And I like it because I can really capitalize on that shadow. It looks a bit more dramatic. It emotes more to me. And to me, it kind of feels like a story, like why is this chair in this empty room and who's to sit in it? So that's why I'm doing that. And you'll also see, if we add the grid back on top of this chair, you'll see that it's in the bottom left-hand crosshair of that grid, and that's a really good placement. Anytime you can get your subject in one of those crosshairs, you know that your composition is going to be a bit more powerful. All right, so now what's next? So most times when I'm going to work from a still life, I want to have a reference, because what happens if I get interrupted from painting or I don't finish it in one setting? And a good reason to take a photograph is, number one, it's a lot easier to paint from a two-dimensional reference, like a photo, than it is to paint from a three-dimensional reference, like an actual chair sitting in front of you. So by taking a photo, I guarantee that I will have my reference for later, but not only that, I will also make sure that my shadow remains the same. If I did this in natural lighting or even throughout the course of the day and I stopped and started again, my shadows might change and that might mess up what I was doing. So by taking a photo and having that photo reference, you know, when you go back to paint it again, the shadows and everything are going to be exactly the way you left it. So an easy little way to get your reference the size you want it is to take the image you're referencing and size it to the same size as your canvas. So like I said, I'm working on a 6x8 and I've cropped it down to that size, so when I print it out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, my reference is the same size as the canvas I'm working on. And this is a really good way to start. As you're working on getting proportion and your composition correct, you at least have a guide to go back to just remind yourself or to keep yourself within the placement of the canvas. And if you want to, you can even make the print one with a grid. And as we work, we'll be putting that grid on our piece as we begin to paint.